I stood in the quiet nursery, and I looked lovingly at the toys left scattered, the picture books with a faint coating of dust, the rocking chair where I had spent precious moments holding my niece. I opened her little pink velvet music box, and I listened one more time to the melody. The little plastic ballerina on her stand was turning round and round. And I took her off her stand and I put her in my pocket. It was the last time that I stood in that nursery. 4 years before, I had stood by the bedside of my oldest sister in the delivery room. She was holding my hand so hard it made me wince. I felt like an old pro after having 3 of my own, and I was there to comfort my brother-in-law and my sister. I wanted to bear some of the pain that she was feeling, but I don't think I would have took it all. I knew better. I was trying not to laugh at my brother-in-law, who was in and out of the room trying to comfort her, telling her that he was there for her, but having to go out in the hallway all the time because he was feeling faint. I watched the color drain from his face, and the nurse would impatiently say, "Go out in the hallway and sit down." This childbirth was very different for me as an observer. There was just a sweet, sweet atmosphere in that room as my niece was born. And an hour later or so, I reached out to her hand, and she clutched my finger tight. I thought she was the most beautiful thing in the world, even though she had nothing but a little bit of blonde fuzz on her head, and she was so wrinkled and red-faced. I was just overwhelmed with love for this little one. And I remember thinking, you won't ever have to wonder if you're loved. We will always be here for you. She could not have had 2 more loving parents. They named her Beth, and we often called her Bethy. What fun we had caring for her, watching her grow. My 3 little girls spoiled her rotten. They were often together, playing, cooing to her, watching her eat and sleep. As she got a little older, my youngest daughter and she became best buddies. They were only 9 months apart. And my 2 oldest girls were twins. And so Bethy and my youngest daughter decided they'd really been cheated in life. They thought everybody should be a twin. And so they decided they would be twins. It was cute to see. Beth had big blue eyes, incredibly long eyelashes, very fine blonde hair, usually put up in 2 little pigtails with big bows. When her baby teeth grew in, she had a little overbite. And when she grinned, she looked like a little mouse. Beth was a very unusual girl, displaying a very strong sense of self from her earliest actions. She seemed to know just how she wanted to be treated. And as she began to talk well, it was obvious she had a very sure view of her place in the world. She had to understand exactly why something had to be done and why it needed to be the way it was. Once she was satisfied with the reason, she was fine, but heaven forbid if she didn't agree. It was not that she didn't do bad things from time to time, but she had a very tender conscience, and she was always sorry when she did something she knew was wrong. One of the phrases that she used so often was she would always say, "Don't tell me what to do." She always wanted time to consider, and we learned to give her that space. It was one of the great joys of my life to watch her puzzle things out. And then with a bright smile, she would announce that she was ready to eat her vegetables or take a nap, and she would joyfully say, "No one told me what to do." She was so bright that it was a joy to help her reason things out, to try to grasp the fundamentals of the world that she lived in. And when her little brother was born, when she was 2, she would often protect him, saying, "Don't tell him what to do." I often wondered what this incredible child would turn into, and if my gentle sister was ready for the teenager the strong young girl would become. I felt so lucky to be raising children with my sister. It was so fun to take them all to the park or the library to hear a story. Beth loved stories beyond anything. Nothing made her happier than to get on the couch under a blanket with her cousins and listen as I would spin a wild story for them of pirates and princesses and a little mouse named Tiny. Beth was immersed, as we all were, in the life of the church, as services were held 3 times a week. And she had a lot of questions for one so young. One day she came to her parents and she said, "I want to be baptized," at the age of 4 years. And they thought, oh, that's cute, but we'll just ignore her. In our tradition, you reached what was called the age of accountability, which was thought to be the time that you were old enough to make a wise decision. And it was usually considered to be around 11 or 12. But Beth just would not let this go. She was insistent, and she even cried about it. My sister tried explaining to her that she was just a little too young to know the seriousness of this tradition. But in desperation, her father took her to the pastor to have a talk, and I just cringed inside. No child could ever challenge church doctrine or tradition. I wonder how he would tell this precious child that she could not be baptized. I wondered how we would comfort her afterwards. But after speaking with Beth, the pastor called a meeting of the deacons, and I was really surprised. Could it be possible that a little girl, could have swayed the male leadership of the church? I'd never heard of such a thing. Grown women didn't stand a chance in this church. But after lengthy discussion, it was agreed that Beth did indeed have the right to be baptized. This little girl had backed down a council of men, the only time I ever saw this happen. She was baptized immersed backwards, and then she started crying because she'd gotten water in her eyes just like any little girl would. She was so happy afterward. And I've thought a lot about that in the years since then, especially since a few weeks later, on one of the darkest nights of my life, I received a phone call telling me that my sister and her family had been in an accident. I hurried to the hospital, and I found that my sister and her husband had not made it. The 2 children were on life support. And at first, my hope was that the children would come home with us, that although life would never be the same, that we would be able to care for them as their parents could not. But I learned that the car that they'd been traveling in had, in the dark, missed a turn onto a bridge, and the car had plunged into the river below. I've often thought since then that neither of the children should have been resuscitated. But when I saw Beth, she was hooked to a breathing machine, and she looked like she was asleep. There was nothing to do but wait and watch and pray. And after a horrible week, on the 6th day, the doctor told us that Beth was gone. There were no measurable brain waves. But we did have a choice, and it was a lovely choice. We could choose to donate her organs to children who were desperate for a chance at life. The family gathered together, and we quickly decided this was something we wanted to do. And we were given a short time to go in and say goodbye. And I remember getting to the foot of her bedside, and I just couldn't get any further. And I just reached down and tenderly held on to her feet. and they felt cold to me. And it's funny how at a time like that, you think of the silliest things. But I was trying to warm her feet. And I told her, thank you for the lives that she would touch today. Quickly, the medical teams assembled. Several teams came and went in helicopters, rushing from our hospital to the hospitals of the children who were waiting for their surgeries. The hospital staff was unbelievably kind, and several of the emergency rescue helicopter team members sat with us as the medical teams did their work. Somewhere in the middle of that busy afternoon, a nurse approached me and she said, "Would you come out in the hallway with me?" She told me not to worry, but Beth was under the guardianship of a judge at the time. We had applied for guardianship, but the paperwork had not gone through. And this judge was a conservative Christian. And when he found out that Beth was on life support and we were donating her organs, he decided to charge our family with murder. According to his rule, that as long as she was breathing, she was alive. No one in the hospital had considered the ramifications. It truly was not our decision. At that point, I was just totally numb, and I thought, what else can possibly go wrong? I was thinking about the lives that were going to be saved today, the last gift that Beth could give. I realized it was worth any legality we had to go through. I would have made the same decision, no matter, even if I'd realized it wasn't my choice to make. Thankfully, in the legal arena, somehow they had our case transferred to another judge in another county, and the conservative Christian was not allowed to touch us. And I was very thankful for that. Many weeks later, I learned that among others, a 6-year-old girl received a liver, a boy had gotten a kidney, and a little boy who lost his eyesight at age 3 was given a transplant that restored his sight. They said that he kept feeling his parents' faces, as it had been years since he'd seen them, and he was trying to reconcile the feel of their faces with the sight. And I hope those beautiful blue eyes are still granting the gift of sight for many years to come. For weeks after the funerals, I carried that little ballerina in my pocket until one day when I couldn't find it. Even that little token had been lost. I thought a lot about the impermanence of life, how life can be so important no matter how short. Beth taught me many lessons. She made me think about whether I was standing up enough for myself. She taught me to trust more in my own sense of reasoning. Her little spirit made me ashamed of the many times that I had given in to the men who almost completely controlled my life. I often echoed her words in my mind, "Don't tell me what to do." It amazed me that this little girl could convince me that I had lessons to learn from her. All of us have people who've made a deep impression on our lives, those who've inspired us, those who've taught us to think in a different way. Remember that we can all learn from each other if we listen. This morning, if you would share with me just a few seconds of silence as you hold in your mind and your heart someone who you remember with love, whether you've lost connection over the years or whether you lost someone very dear to you. Let us bring their memory into this room and honor their places in our lives. Let us sit just for a few seconds.